India's rising fiscal deficit has put the spotlight on the government's rising expenses and falling revenues. Budget 2012 was the last chance for the government to correct this through policy measures. But it's unlikely that will happen now, all thanks to the Congress's poor performance in the UP elections. The question now is whether a visibly weaker Congress will be inclined at all to push for reforms. Swati D'Souza has this report.
The writing is on the wall. The ruling party is down on its knees and is unlikely to have a firm footing until the general elections, which are just a year away. It's clear politics and not economics will be the top priority for the UPA here on.
मैंने कैंपेन लड़ा है और मैं आगे खड़ा था, तो जिम्मेदारी मेरी है.
But taking the blame will not solve the real problem, which is the logjam in policy making. So far, the government has been on a weak wicket as far as pushing for reforms is concerned. It just has not been able to convince its allies to back such proposals. And it's a catch-22 situation for the UPA now, because on the one hand, its relationship with allies like the Samajwadi Party and Trinamool Congress Party are weakening, and on the other hand, the opposition is becoming stronger across several states. That means the UPA administration is in no position to aggressively push for any change.
A lot depends again on what is the stance taken by alliance partners, because alliance partners go back on certain then they just can't go ahead, So to that extent, you have to understand that the government's hands are tied if it means that they have to progress on certain things which requires cooperation from some partners.
Proof of that is the fact that when the government was pushing for FDI in multi-brand retail a few months ago, its allies were up in arms against it. To date, the issue remains unresolved. That's even though FDI in multi-brand retail could kickstart a virtuous cycle of higher employment, lower prices and higher consumption. While India Inc. is hoping that the government will take this issue once again in the coming months, it's unlikely that allies will change their stance on the matter.
समाजवादी पार्टी ने एफडीआई जो रिटेल में आ रहा था उसके खिलाफ पार्टी ने बात रखी थी और कई बार इश्यूज ऐसे आए जहां पर समाजवादी पार्टी ने अपनी बात रखी है. महंगाई के खिलाफ कई बार कांग्रेस को हम लोगों ने कटघरे में खड़ा किया है.
The logjam over FDI in multi-brand retail took a heavy toll on the economy. That's because it delayed a total 31 legislations in sectors like insurance, mining, land acquisition and banking, which was slated to be tabled in the last session of the parliament, and things have only gotten worse since then. Now power, coal, telecom and the aviation sectors are also crying for more clarity and changes in regulation. It's clear that the government needs to push for reforms to put the economy back on the growth track. The big question though is whether it can afford to take any harsh decisions considering that elections are just 24 months away.
I do think it's time for fiscal consolidation. I do think it's time to cut down on profligate public expenditure. I do think it's time to target subsidies. I do think it's time to reduce populism. Is that likely to happen? I don't think so. But my argument would be that this would have been the case even if the state level elections had gone differently.
According to a report by Citigroup Global Markets, while the consensus is that the Congress will get more cautious and hand out more softs, resulting in fiscal slippages and move farther away from reforms, it could well not be the case. Instead, the party could be more forceful with reforms, given that backpedaling is not paying electoral dividends. The bad news, though, is that the report says the odds are in favor of defensive strategy rather than offensive economic management.
I don't think the Congress or the UPA too has to be defensive about the budget. But yes, they should be what I say, I don't know how to put it, more sensible, more responsible. They say BJP doesn't cooperate. Yes, BJP also may not be cooperating, may be opportunistic. But forget BJP. Let Congress and UPA, especially Congress, behave in a magnanimous, in a good way.
But there are those who believe that good economics and not populist schemes drive the electorate. According to a Morgan Stanley research, since the end of 2007, 2 out of 3 incumbent governments which have delivered on the development agenda have won elections, as has been seen in Manipur, Uttarakhand and Punjab in the recent past.
Our agenda to the people was performance. We requested the people that please look at a performance. Our whole campaign, our whole mission was the performance of the Chief Minister and a government. And people appreciated our performance.
That's a lesson that the UPA government, which has been mired in scams and controversies in the past 2 years, seems to have learned the hard way.
हम अपने साथियों के साथ बैठकर फिर स्टेट के प्रदेशों के लोग को बुला के उनका राय भी लेकर और फिर तय करेंगे कि क्या वजह क्या थी हमारी हार की। ये हो सकता है, आशीष पहले हो सकता है कि ये भी महंगाई का भी एक चुनाव पर कुछ असर है।
The big question then is, will the budget 2012 deliver on the development agenda? Perhaps yes. Morgan Stanley research is of the view that budget 2012 could trigger a concerted effort to consolidate fiscal deficit and raise growth through development so that social spending becomes more viable ahead of the general elections.
We must focus more on outcomes rather than inputs. You put in more money, and if outputs aren't as good, it's not really much use. So government has been talking about it, and in case this is implemented, I'm sure that this will add to that effort where the outcomes will improve. Government will be able to measure it better, and it will put a stop to the misutilization if it takes place.
So what are the policy measures that need a big push this fiscal? Here's India Inc.'s priority list. Administrative reforms like interministerial coordination and transparency and accountability in governance. Power sector reforms. Agriculture reforms. FDI in retail. Reviving the infrastructure sector. Passing important bills like the mining bill and manufacturing bill. Implementing the goods and services tax. And simplifying taxes through the direct tax code.
We do need to make sure that we continue on the reform agenda. We continue on, for example, in the budget there is an expectation on direct tax code. There is an expectation on GST. I hope that those get pushed through.
I would expect that some very strong measures are put in the direction of policies that have been announced to create growth in the country. For example, the Prime Minister has announced a national manufacturing policy. And I think, to convert that into reality, we really need to bring in some amount of stimulus in relation to investments in manufacturing.
The wish list is long and expectations are sky high. And everyone's keeping their fingers crossed as to what Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee will pull out of his bag next week.